Thank you for coming, and it's a great pleasure for me to be here to share with you my current research, joined with Professor Heckman. Okay, I should go to my research first. So our paper is titled A Dynamic Model of Health, Education, and Wealth with Credit Constraints and Rational Addiction. So to motivate, we all know, I guess most of people in this room know, that there is a positive correlation between health, education, and wealth. Now, the key question is, how should we interpret such positive correlation? Does that mean that we see that more educated people tend to be the healthy ones? Does that mean that this is because of you have better education and therefore you are being more healthier? To interpret in this way, we need to be very careful. There are several challenges associated with such interpretation. So first, it's reverse causality. What do I mean by reverse causality is that it is possible that more healthy people can work better, can study better. And in that sense, that health can contribute to better education, and then education can reinforce the health. So in this sense, we need to be very careful in terms of how do we interpret such correlation. And the second challenge is that there is possible selection. By selection, we all know that high ability people can select into education, and then potentially education can reinforce the investment in health. And so therefore, even if we see a correlation between health and education, it may be due to the selection based on individual ability. And we need to know how big is this selection. And last, as economists, we're always interested in economic mechanisms. So we can make meaningful policy suggestions. To be precise, what exactly are the economic mechanisms through which education, health, and wealth interact with each other, and how do we promote better policies to improve health, education, and wealth? To see this, let me show you some facts first. So those are the correlation between initial health. By initial, what I mean by initial here is actually the young adults at age 17. And I plot out their adult education outcomes, that is their education achievement between age 25 and 30. What we see is that, so this is initial health level, poor and fair and poor, up to the excellent health level. We see that as your initial health level improve, the education completion also increase. And similarly, what we see in another graph is that as people's initial health level improve, and also this individual by age 25 to 30 tend to have much higher wealth level. So this is really potentially say that there is a reverse causality between health and education and wealth. Now the second one I'm going to show you is that another possible mechanism we have already talked about both from Professor Heckman and Stefano, that potentially there is a role of family income in shaping people's adult outcomes. So this is one of the possible suggestive evidence of that as well. So what I did here is I plot out individuals' health, the adult health, based on their initial parents' net worth. So the first graph shows that for the individual whose parents' net worth is below the median, they have relatively lower health. Now, for the individual whose parents' net worth is above the median, and they have better health in adult years. And similarly, we see the same pattern for education in terms of by parents' wealth. So this is potentially say that how the parent wealth matters, especially if we consider in a world that there is financial friction, meaning that if you want to invest in, for example, health and education, but you cannot. And that leads us to think about the role of credit constraints in particular. If the credit constraints is binding, many people, especially the young individuals with parents who are low in their net worth, they cannot invest. So their invest in both health and education is suboptimal. So now what is the objective of this paper? In this paper, we're trying to address these three unanswered questions. So the first one is, what are the causal effects between education, health, and wealth? Now, the second question is, what are the economic mechanisms through which education, health, and wealth interact with each other? And lastly, we want to understand, that's actually associated with the first point, how important is selection and what are the sources of selection? To do this, we develop and estimate a life cycle model with health, education, and wealth, and we estimate the causal effect based on the model, and then we can evaluate the economic mechanism which have already been built into this model. And lastly, we can show, we can assess the economic importance of selection. So in terms of literature, I'm just going to very briefly talk about the literature. This paper is very broadly related to 4 strands of the literature. So the first literature is about the health as human capital. This idea has been dated back to 1960s. And also it has been formalized in Grossman 1972, which says that health is a form of human capital. If you have better health, and you can be more productive. And many empirical work has been following up with literature and find out that is the case. The second literature this paper relates to is rational addiction literature. In this literature, it's proposed by Murphy and Becker. In this literature, what they have proposed is that many of the unhealthy behaviors, for example, smoking and drinking, are addictive, and it is rational addictive in the sense that people are forward-looking. When you make decision today, you know what is the payoff in tomorrow, and in that sense, it's rational addictive. And thirdly, this paper relates to the literature that studies the relationship between education, family income, as well as health. And lastly, there is a literature really looking at what are the effects of wealth and education, and if there is a possible evidence of credit constraints and how important it is. So this paper really combines these 4 literature together and provide a uniform framework to study the relationship between health, education, and wealth. And also we are considering the fact that unhealthy behaviors are rational addictive. So the model, due to the time limitation, as well as consider that I am the last speaker right before lunch, so I'm going to skip any, there's not going to be any math symbol or math equations. Just I'm going to provide you the ingredients of the model, as well as intuitively what are the economic mechanisms that is in the model. So what are the ingredients of the model? So first, individuals are risk averse and forward-looking. And the individuals make the following decisions. First, they decide how much to consume, and they also decide whether to work, and if they work part-time or full-time, and they decide how much to save, as well as they can decide whether they engage in unhealthy behavior. By unhealthy behavior, here I would like you to think about it like whether the individual decide to be a heavy drinker or heavy smoker, this kind of unhealthy behavior. And their decisions are impacted by the following 3 aspects. The first is that at each point of time, when individuals make decision, their current decision is affected by their previous decisions. In particular, their decision will be affected by their previous accumulated health, education, and wealth. And the second, when individuals make decision, they know what is their initial endowment. By here, the initial endowment is what we have been calling the cognitive and non-cognitive abilities. Here we take it as given. And lastly, also when individuals make decision, their own parents' education and wealth also matters, in the sense that their parents can give them transfer, so to enable them to provide them enough financial resources so they can complete their education. Also, in this model, there are two interesting mechanisms which has been built in. First is that we allow the health behaviors to be addictive. To be precise, that means that your current utility of conducting unhealthy behavior also depends on how many years that you have been engaging in unhealthy behavior. In that sense, it's addictive. And also, we consider the possibility of credit constraints. So what are the mechanisms which is in the model that characterize the interaction between health, education, and wealth? So one of the key part is health. So we all know that health is very persistent. That means if I am healthy today, next period I tend to be healthier as well. So in that sense, think about there is a health production function, and today's health is an input into tomorrow's health production. And also, health is a form of human capital. It's a factor that can impact many of our other choices. For example, like schooling and working. We know that if you are healthier, then you may have your cost of going to school is maybe lower. And similarly, healthy people tend to be more productive in the labor market, in this sense that health can impact your labor market productivity as well as impact your wages. And the second to last is health can impact your discount rate. What does it mean is that think about healthy people, they can live longer life. And therefore, when they think about their future, distant future, they care more about their future because they have a longer horizon. That's the way we're trying to incorporate this health effect. And lastly, health is a consumption goods, which meaning that if I'm healthier, I have higher utility than an unhealthy person, other things be equal. Education, how does education work? First of all, education is also an input to your health production function. This point has been formalized first by the Grossman in his 1972 paper, which says, think about education as providing necessary knowledge that you can be more productive in your health production function. And also the second point of education is that we all know that education can allow you to earn higher wages in the labor market, and you can have better productivity in the labor market as well. Lastly is wealth. So wealth is simple. Wealth just provides you the financial resources so you can invest in both health and consumption. And the consumption, again, can impact your health. In this way, wealth can indirectly impact both your health and education. So in terms of data, we are using NSLY 97. This is a relative young cohort. And we focus on the white males, age 17 to 31, over the time period 1992 to 2011. And this nice thing about this data set is that it has very nice measures of health, education, as well as a lot of choice variables. To be precise, we see that this one of the important choice variable is what we call here by unhealthy behavior. And this is really whether you have been heavy drinking or heavy smoking. Nice thing about this data set is that we actually can trace the accumulated years of unhealthy behavior within this data set from age 17 to age 31. So this is what we call the years of unhealthy behavior from the past accumulation is what we call by addiction stock. And that is going to impact your current unhealthy behavior. And also in this data set, we see the parents' net worth and the parents' education, as well as how much your parents transfer to you in terms of cash. And also, in terms of measurements, we have very rich measurements on both cognitive and non-cognitive abilities, such as IQ, such as ASWAB scores, as well as various adverse behavior index from the early years. So in terms of estimations, empirical strategy, in this paper we employ a two-stage estimation. In the first stage, we just estimate the joint distribution of health, cognitive and non-cognitive abilities using a factor model. And in the second step, we're going to use the first step's estimate the parameter as a given, and then estimate the structural parameters on preference, production function, budget constraint, and the transfer functions using simulated method of movements. The result is still preliminary, but let me show you some model fit so far. So we can see that this is the model fit of health, measures of health, which is and over time. And also we see this is education attainment over time from age 17 to 31, and the wealth as well as unhealthy behavior. So the fitting pattern is generally good, and for unhealthy behavior, we won't be able to fit the age 21, which we think have something to do with graduation, or that's legal drinking age. So that's not something we can fit, and we don't intend to, yes. Okay, a more interesting part of using the model, the strength of a structured model is really trying to provide you to disentangle the importance of different economic mechanisms, and that's what we are going to do here. In here, we're trying to think about three counterfactual simulations in order for us to assess how important it is for different mechanisms to work. The first mechanism we investigating is credit constraints. That is how important it is for credit constraints to impact individuals' decisions on health and education. In particular, what will happen if individuals face no credit constraints if we relax credit constraints. Now, the second simulation that we are considering is that we want to know how important it is this addiction to work. Imagine that suddenly there is a medicine come out that can make alcoholic not have a fresh start of life, not being addictive to their past behavior anymore. What will happen to their behavior? What will happen to their health? And thirdly, we want to look, holding everything else being equal, how important it is selection, especially selection based on cognitive and non-cognitive abilities. To see this, okay, those are the results. So this is the first result in this counterfactual studies. I relax the credit constraints in the counterfactual studies. So the blue bar is the fitted model, and this light blue is the counterfactual simulation where there is no credit constraints. What we see from here, from our preliminary result, is that we see that there is not much impact for the individuals who previously choose to be high school dropout. Those are the people who have very low cognitive and non-cognitive skills. Even if you relax their credit constraint, they are not going to pursue higher education. But the biggest change coming from this group, which in reality obtain their high school degree, what our simulation shows is that if you allow them to borrow more, those people who obtain their high school degree would like to pursue more education, either in some college or in four-year college. And this is the impact of the health over the life cycle. Again, the solid blue line is the fitted model, and we see that a small improvement in health in the counterfactual world. This is really because as people obtain more education, they are more productive in their health production, and their health will improve over time. And lastly, for the counterfactual of the boring constraint, what we see, this is not surprising, is that people tend to work less. This is like people work less in part-time while they are in school, and this full-time work pattern is purely because when people are in school, they do not work full-time. Now, the second counterfactual simulation I would like to share with you today is to looking at how important is addiction. And we see that basically, again, this solid blue line is the fitted model with addiction, and the dash blue line is the counterfactual simulation where there is no addiction anymore. And we see that people's unhealthy behavior drop by half. That means previously 20% of people are conducting unhealthy behavior, now they're only 10% pretty much. And if we're looking at who are the people who reduce their unhealthy behavior, the most of the impact coming from the people who choose lower education group. And this actually is the biggest impact of this simulation. And we see that the healthy impact it's positive but pretty small. And we don't see any impact on education, mainly because of the health effect is very small. And therefore, we don't see much of the impact on education, and a little bit impact on wealth. And lastly, is the third counterfactual simulation. That is how important it is of selection based on cognitive and non-cognitive ability. In this simulation, so each individual, think about the individuals inside of each cell. They are identical in every aspect except their non-cognitive and cognitive abilities. And this says that as their non-cognitive ability improve, their health will improve as well. And as their cognitive ability improve, their health it will improve as well. So the mechanism is that first, both these two abilities are direct input in your production, in your health production function. If you are high ability people, you tend to be more productive in your health production function. And also, as we will see here, we see that at age 30 years old, we see a much steeper slope by both non-cognitive ability and cognitive ability. This is because of, think about, if I am a high ability people, that means that I can also choose higher education. And in that sense, and my education can reinforce my health investment. And this is really the idea of a dynamic complementarity, that high ability people, they are more productive and as well as more productive, their benefit of investment is also higher as well. So over time, we see a much steeper slope by both non-cognitive and cognitive abilities. This is for health. Similar pattern we will see for education. And by 20 years old, we don't see much of the selection based on cognitive ability of education level, but we see a much bigger selection at age 30. And the same thing for wealth. You see wealth at age 20 is pretty flat, but we see a much bigger role of selection for the individuals at their 30s. So to conclude, this paper made 3 contributions to the literature. So the first is that we propose an estimatable dynamic structure model with health capital investment, rational addiction, education, and wealth. And our model can address reverse causality as well as selection, both based on individual characteristics as well considering the family background. And also our model can incorporate various economic mechanisms. Our empirical findings so far, we find out that the credit constraints do matter. This is actually consistent with recent studies which shows the suggestive evidence that the recent cohort, which is the cohort who go to college in 2000, they are much more credit constrained compared to the older cohort. And also we find out that selection by cognitive and non-cognitive abilities is important. And we show that this importance actually is reinforced over time because of you can also engage in all kinds of different investment over time. And in the future, there are 2 extensions of this model. First is think about this model provide a benchmark framework to study inequality in a broader perspective. From this paper, we did not incorporate, for example, race, gender, but potentially this framework could be extended to study broader inequality by race, by gender, looking at how do you differentiate between labor market opportunity as well against the discrimination. And also this paper, because we also incorporate the family background such as parents' education and parents' net worth, potentially this model could also serve as a benchmark to extend to study the topics such as intergeneration mobility. Thank you.